Okay, so again, this lesson will be devoted to presenting the detailed specification, what you have to do for the design part. We can share this design specification. These are being also posted on BIP. So the instruction are organized in two parts. One part, which is the general specification of what you have to do, are in a separate, let me just close, are in a separate file, which remains invariant. So it's the specification, what you have to do remains invariant for all a session, while each session, what we change is the subject of your website. So let's go first to understand what is the website that you have to design, and then move to what you have to do with this specification. So as announced at the beginning of the course, the website is for a voluntary association, an association which which is not profit and provides services to address different aspects, different needs of people, of the society. It can be first emergency cross service, first aid service, like the Red Cross, the Golden Cross in Milano. It can be something for support children with special needs, the elderly, something related to the environment, anything, a sport association. So it's really very broad. Say a sport association, okay, one characterization is that you provide services for free, okay? It's not just no profit in the sense that you officially are an ONLUS, onlus, just that you really involved many voluntary people. And this, what I give you is are the minimum requirements. So you can expand these requirements if you want. These are the core elements that you should address. You're not forced to expand it, but there are situations, for example, in which some students told me, okay, I would really want to develop, I have a voluntary association asked me to develop their own website. Can I use it as part of the project for this course? And the answer is yes, as far as you can do whatever you want. You can reuse what you do for for the external world in this project, as far as your website, from a design perspective, satisfy at least these requirements. First, the request. The second request is that you have to use the implementation environment, the implementation tools and programming tool and framework described in this course. Okay, so these are minimum requirements. Again, if you want to expand them, you're free. It's not mandatory. If you expand it and produce something more than that with respect to these requirements, does not necessarily leads to an increase of your score, because we look at the quality of what you produce, not at the quantity. So so we will evaluate you on the satisfaction of these minimum requirements, on the criteria that were provided at the beginning of the course. So completeness, quality of the specification, quality of the design documentation. I will write a document about our evaluation methods for by the time that you deliver your design document. They are anticipated already in the course introduction. So the fact that you add more things does not mean that you necessarily get an extra score. We evaluate first the completeness and the quality of your project with respect to the minimum requirements, and then if you have good quality also in the extension, that will be considered. Otherwise, we just don't consider it. Okay, so that to say that you're free to expand that as far as you satisfy the minimum so the quality of this minimal requirement. You satisfy this minimal requirement with a good level of quality. So basically, these are the specifications. These are sort of simplified CIDM specification described textually. So you have to design a website in which a single topic is your association. The association, give it a name. You can give it, if you're creating something for the real world, it can be the name of your real association. Anyway, the single topic is your association. We have one association in this website, the one for which you develop the website. You have basically three multiple topics or kind of topics. Let me specify it as kind of topics, which are service, person, and event. The service is what the service offers, the activities, the services that it provides. And we expect that each service has at least a textual presentation, some practical info, one or more photos. And then there are the person, where the key elements of association of this kind that are described in a simple way, an image and a short description, at least. Then you have the events. There can be events associated to this, so described by very short textual description, practical information, and one image. Okay, so not too complex. The relevant relationship are, okay, we want to know which person serves in which service. So we want to have a relation between service and person and service, service and person. In bracket, you see the cardinality. That is that one person serves at most in three services, depending on what a service is, because it's an association for children, for taking care of children. You can have services can be taken care during play, during doing homeworks, bringing them at school. So you have the granularity, depends on really on which service you provide. So we expect that the same person can work in multiple services, so at least one service. So between okay, so at most three services for each person, and at most five person for each service. You can modify, they are not really, they're reference cardinality. And then there are services who are presented in they can be presented in events. So you can have a service presented at most in one event in general, or in 0 events. So the idea, and that is the reason of this symbol, is that not all services are associated to an event. So this is is an optional relevant relationship. Similarly, when you have an event, it can be associated to a service or not. So you can have an open day for your association where you present association, or you want to have a end of the year big party. That is an event, but it's not specific to a specific service. Or if you have done, if you have a seminar associated to a specific activity, so seminars associated to an educational service, that in that specific case, the event is associated to a service. So just to say that these are optional. So optional in the sense that you might have situation in which you have them, you might have situation and content which you don't have it. Instead, every time I'm looking at the R3B, every time you have an event, there is a person who is the contact person for that event. And every time you have a person, that person is not necessarily a contact point, an organizer for that event. So basically you have you have 6 relationships, but basically 3 if you make a cluster between a relationship at its inverse. So Each of them, B is the inverse of A in all these three situations. And then we have one multiple group, which is events by month, which means I want to group event every month. It cannot be very many. It depends on the kind of association you have. Anyway, I want to be able, so and the way you will then render these events through pages, through this group to pages, will really depends on how many you have. So that's why I did not specify the cardinality here because it's very variable, depending on your case study. And again, remember also this cardinality can be modified as far as you maintain this relevant relationship. And then we have the group of all purpose services, all people, and the multiple group and the group all events, which members are the group of events of each specific month. If you want, you can add an option for functionality, which is contact form, in order to contact the people, to contact the association. Contact forms are the elements, the operational elements, input form, transaction, operation are elements that are not managed in IDM. So if you want, you can add a page for contact form in your PIDM, schema. That is an optional. There is no special notation for it. You can invent a notation for form pages. It's being added here because maybe in the final implementation you might be asked to include it. We don't have agreed yet on the final specification for your prototype. So this, what I can anticipate that your final prototype, in the final prototype you will have to implement a subset of the pages that you design to satisfy these minimal requirements. Okay, so now let's switch to what you have to do, which is another document. So I will share with you another document. All these documents are in BIP. Okay, so let me zoom it a bit. Okay, so these are general instructions, unless there are mistakes or we feel the need to extend it with some, to address some question of the students. These are the general instructions that are invariant across the entire course, while remember the specifications of the minimum specification for the application, so the main topics of the application change after July. So okay, so what you have to do, you have to take the application design requirements that we have just consider your exam session in general, and see, okay, what are the application design requirements for this period? And then you have to do a number of things. Designing the large, designing the small, create scenarios, and report. Okay, so what does designing the large means? Design the large, we've been talking about design the large in these last 3 lessons. Basically, to take the specifications, the minimum specification, and translate it into a C.
I'm sorry, teacher, we cannot see the document.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, 1 second. I forgot to press share. You're right. Ooh, design. Here we are. Can you see it now? Is that okay? So someone can speak and tell me don't, but apparently Teams tell me that now it's shared.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you for, I thought I had to click it. Okay, anyway, these are the general instructions, as I said, invariant, and this is what you have to do. Design in the large. Create 3 schemas, C, L, P, IDM. For a website that satisfies at least the assigned design specification. So if you want to extend it, you have to include the extensions in your schemas. Okay, so it's not so because at the end I will check when you will deliver the prototype. I will go back to your design specifications and I will check if unless you deliver a different design specification, of course. I will check if your design specification in the large and in the small, mainly in the large, let's say. You can change your mind in the small, but the specification in the large correspond to your implemented prototype. So any extension should be planned and include in this design specification. So the website that is this means at least. So if you extend it, okay, but you have at least to include this part, the specification in the previous slide document, and extension if any. Of course, there is a consistency rule. LIDM must be consistent with C, and P must be consistent with L. Also, add textual comments whenever something sounds not too evident. Add textual comment only if needed. So there's not an option. I mean, it's not mandatory if needed. Things that you forget typical to say is cardinality. You forget to include in your schema are cardinality. Remember, so there are just hints based on practice. And remember to include navigation patterns in PIDM. Don't forget to mention to capture your navigation topology using navigation pattern. That is the step that we have discussed so far in the last three days, three lections. And then designing the small. Here I give you the general specification, then we will dig more deeply on this topic in the rest of this lesson. The rest of the lesson we talk about designing the small and interaction scenarios. Okay, what is designing the small? Basically, you have to give me a concrete example. It includes, oh, there's a mistake. Yeah. Okay, sorry. You have to give me concrete examples of how your pages will be rendered in practice. So it's design the small is the first hypothesis of how your pages will look like. It's an hypothesis because maybe when you go back to implementation, when you start implementation, you might not be able to render all these elements. But it's a design specification, then you will implement it and you may come back and say, okay, I have to revise some parts because they're too difficult or when I try to implement it, the look and feel is not the one that I expected. So if you deliver your design documentation during the course, we do not expect that your design specification in the small are the one of the final prototype. Of course, if you deliver the entire documentation in one shot, the entire documentation and materials in one shot at an exam date, we expect that everything is coherent. Okay, so the design small anyway is a set of commented page structure for the various PIDM pages, and these are examples. So we will see example later in the course. But you can make examples like this. So it's really up to you how to define a structure. Again, we will see more example, but these are examples, they're not mandatory, okay? So for example, you say, okay, I take a page, split in parts, like a grid, and I say, okay, on here, on top, I put the name, so I'll tell you what I'm referring to. Here I put a landmark with their labels. Here I put structural link. Here I put the main content. Here I put orientation info. So it's a grid where you specify in each portion what you put. Here is another example of page structure in which there is some more concrete. It's a bit more visual. Okay. When you have defined this structure, that can be done also through sketches. Okay, when you've done this structure, you can try to make it more concrete in terms of some visual properties and create some commented screenshots. And the example is below here. So that is a very minimalistic, of a page that, by the way, does not exist anymore. But the idea here is that, okay, this is how the initial look and feel of my page. Here we have landmark, here is the content, here is the transition link. Okay, so what is important? So it's a sort of two progressive step. Here I design a high-level structure, because here is mainly structure. And here I move a step forward and try to fill this, to give some, at some degree, the layout characteristic, visual characteristic of my page. And I include some realistic context. So don't write lore ipsum, put in the screenshot, put realistic concept. So what I want you to report are the progressive steps of your page design in the small. First, starting with figure out of how a page is organized, and then try to give some layout properties and try to see how that page structure fits with the real contents. Okay, so you have to produce a number of things like this or like this, and we will see more example in the slides. So give me the page structure, what you put where in the page, and give me an example in which you try to include some visual element, to use some visual properties and real content. Okay, so this create some comment and add comment. So these are commented page structures for the various PADM pages. Which pages? I'll tell you down here. The comments should highlight the meaning of the various elements of the page. So if this is a structure link, a transition link, a group link, orientation info, and what dialogue act or introductory act or transition act this page correspond to, the page or the portion of the page correspond to. And a typical mistake that you do is that you don't use the IDM terminology properly. You're very, I mean, you seem to have to ignore all the story about the step-by-step design process through progressive with somehow precise terminology. So the typical mistake that you do in your project is that you forget about IDM terminology, and that is, this is an exercise about applying this terminology. So of course you get a very low score if you don't use the terminology correct. So the typical mistake that you do are you don't use terminology property. That is one very frequent mistake. The second one is about consistency. So many often you are not consistent between the various levels. And the third mistake is you forget about comments at all, and you don't use realistic content. Okay, but I think that all these, if you read this document carefully there and you follow it somehow literally, you won't do this mistake. So which pages, I mean, how many of this page structure and screenshot we want to have? One page for a topic, in our case, at least one page for the association in the assign website. One page for at least one kind of topic. So choose people or people or what if we have service. Okay. Oh, it's one. No, sorry, it's a mistake for each. I will correct it. It's for each kind of topic. I was thinking that. Okay, for each kind of topic. So we have one page for people, one page for service, one page for event, and then at least 3 introductory pages. Choose. Okay. As you notice, I don't care about the home page at this stage. Then, once you have done this work, you have to provide an interaction scenario. An interaction scenario is a flow of user interaction across your website. So, and it is designed, defined having users in mind. So, a user of a specific profile having a specific goal. Okay, so say, okay, I am Meiji. I am a person who wants to do some voluntary activity at this service. That is a profile. I am the mother of a child, and I want to see if I can bring my child to this center. So there can be different scenarios for different user profile. So scenario has a sort of format to describe it. It's typically defined by a narrative. So in our case, in the case of the format that I want you to use, you can have many formats in the literature. The format that I want you to use are short narrative, short description of user profile, goals, main task. So who is the user? What is his main goal? And main tasks to achieve this goal. And then you have a sequence of typically you can also miniaturize screenshot. So you have to imagine what are the pages that the user would traverse in order to execute this task. In general, you reuse the pages that you have defined here. Here all the pages are commented. So here the pages are reported to make me understand how you have structured the content and the links and the various elements in your layout. Typically, the pages that you have defined here are reused, so you don't have to do the work twice. You can reuse them to define scenarios. Scenarios have only one comment, a comment or a visual element that highlights what is the user does on that page. So you have just to highlight the interactive element, so the link which is activated by the user. You can use a circle, an arrow, whatever. Okay. And then, so how many scenarios? So this is the definition of scenarios. We want to have 3 interaction scenarios for very simple 3. I mean, I say 3 because it depends on how big is your goal and how big are your tasks. You can also make 2. I said 3 because typically students find it easier to create small scenarios traversing 3-4 pages. But you can have a longer scenario. In that case, you can do 2, but 3 is the reference number. So you have to describe each scenario textually and virtually. Visually means through screenshot. Okay, so that above is the definition of scenario. And here we repeat again, describe 3 interaction scenario. The final step is, in your documentation, is create, the content in IDM schemas and in screenshot are described very informally and very much in the large. Now it comes the times come to specify in detail your content, creating an entity relationship diagram and the corresponding relationship table, relational table. I assume that you know about ER and relational table from previous courses. If not, the concept is very simple. You can find it even in Wikipedia. It's important to note that the notation is, since your diagram at the end is very simple, the notation is the one presented here. And I should say, okay, I don't want to share because it takes me time. Anyway, the notation is the typical one of, I will show you an example in the slides. Okay, a typical mistake if you take some tools that provide you a non-standard, non-traditional entity relationship notation. There is one entity relationship notation which is standardized. Use that one, not the variants. Okay. And what do you have to deliver? When you have done all this work, what you have to deliver is a design document in which you have to number the pages, please. And then you have the following main section. The cover, the specification of your group and your delivery time. I added to this specification link to your running prototype because this is a specification for people who have who want to deliver everything one shot. So if when you deliver time of delivery, when you deliver your design specification, you have already developed your prototype. Please include the link to the prototype. If not, we will just evaluate the design documentation. Then there is a table of content with page number, an abstract that describes what the document is about, then a section with C IDM schema, L IDM schema, P IDM schema, and comments if relevant. Then the design in the small, described above, the scenarios, and database design, ER, and relational table. You don't need to waste much words. It's mainly schemas with comments, some page strata and screenshot, scenarios. Here there is a short text on introduction, and entity relationship diagram and relationship table. There are some say formatting constraints, so please include team members in the footer or header, and then please name the file so that we can easily understand who is the owner of your documentation. Everything must be delivered on BIP. I have received some message from students saying, okay, where do I deliver my usability document? Everything for design and usability is going to be delivered on BIP. For the prototype, there are different specifications that will be given to you at due time. The other important point, which holds that for when we will have the dates and the modes of the exam, is that you must deliver, you must register to the exam. I mean, I can understand students who come from abroad or the Erasmus students or students that come from abroad who don't expect that they have to register themselves for the exam. You have to register for the exam in the specific date where you want to deliver your material, or if you do things during the course and if you're evaluated during the course, the exam when you want you to have your score recorded. Okay, there is no way to record your score unless you are in the list of the people registered for that exam. So it's not enough to be registered for the course. You need to be registered for the exam. And this is a warning that seems to be stupid, but every year I get crazy with students who I don't find in the list to register. Okay, that is all for these specifications of the exam. Okay, I will update. I have noticed some minor mistakes. I will update the file that you find on BIP. I will switch to the slides where we describe designing the small and scenarios. So I will stop the registration. Okay, well, let me answer. Let me answer this question, then I stop the registration, I load the exam, the other slide. Sorry, all these specifications are included completely. Also, if we deliver the document on the 22nd of April. Sorry, I don't understand the question. So maybe please reformulate the question, and then I will try to answer, because I don't get the point.